there is so much to appreciate, and it is harder work to appreciate it than to take it for granted and like choose negativity and complain about whatever. That's the path of least resistance, but the path of the greatest joy is appreciating this life for the paradise that it is, and appreciating the miracle of your own consciousness and awareness. Perfect. Let's do it.
All right. Okay. So, Eric, welcome to the Freedom Pact podcast.
Thanks for having me, Lewis. I'm psyched about it. Will you tell me where the name Freedom Pact came from? Like, what's the intent?
Okay. Yeah. So, there's two of us that run this podcast, myself and my best friend, Joe. So, fresh out of university, we just started pretty much meeting up a couple of times a week, and we just go for these long drives and just talk about books we'd read or lectures we'd seen online or just personal development stuff. We just share ideas with each other. We were both working jobs that we hated at the time. We both particularly didn't do degrees at university that we actually planned on doing anything with. So I did a history degree that I didn't actually really much enjoy. I was working a job I hated, and we were just sort of stuck in that little box there. And we were just sort of worried about where life would end up if we didn't make any sort of change. Like, we're just scared that we'd wake up one day and we'd be 20 years down the line in the exact same spot. So we just decided to just go, gung-ho and act on these ideas we were talking about, because we talk about these ideas, but we'd never actually take action on them. That's a big thing with personal development readers. You read a book, it's quite inspiring, you forget about it and move on. But so we just made a promise to each other that we were going to do everything we could to achieve what we thought at the time would be freedom. And we made a promise together in a car that night. We were just out on the road. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. We were getting deep. So we made this promise to be free, and we've worked on it ever since. So that's where the podcast came from.
That's awesome, man. That's super cool. What's your, I love that. What's the freedom progress bar? What percent free do you feel?
I think I'm only just getting started, really. We're 3 years in. Maybe this was 3 years ago this happened. So definitely taken some big steps, but there's still a long way to go and still a lot of internal work to do.
Sure.
So that was the premise behind this podcast, is just to talk to people like yourself and just have really impactful, actionable conversations that can help us first and foremost, and then hopefully help everyone who's listening as well.
That's cool, man. I really like that. Yeah.
I appreciate that. And freedom is actually one of the topics I plan on asking you about later on. But let's start first and foremost. So I read this book this week, The Almanack of Naval Ravikant. So before we get into it, just set the scene for everyone listening who may not know who Naval is. Mm-hmm. Why did you put this book together? Who is Naval, and why should we care?
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. So let's start with Naval. He's very well followed and in the Silicon Valley world. And that's where I met him, or came to kind of follow him first. I was just kind of like in school trying to figure out how to get into this world of tech. And somebody that I met who was, a decade ahead of me and who I really looked up to was like, you got to read everything that Paul Graham has written, and you got to read everything that Nivi and Naval are writing on venture hacks. And that'll help you kind of like understand the Valley culture and what's going on there. So I did. And that was kind of where I started to kind of follow and learn from him. And over the years, like what he has talked about has changed a lot, and what he's accomplished has changed a lot. So Naval is an entrepreneur and an investor. Basically, he was kind of early in starting to talk about, a lot of like innovation, technical innovations, trends in the Valley, cryptocurrencies. He is also now kind of quite well known for like a little bit like synthesizing philosophies on Twitter. So if you're in the Twitter world or the podcast world, you have probably heard of him at least somewhat. He's got some very kind of well-traveled podcast episodes with like on a Knowledge Project and Joe Rogan and stuff like that. But he was like, a poor immigrant to America at 10 years old and very like much the American dream, kind of self-made as much as anybody can be, and has worked hard to kind of both become wealthy and become happy, and seems to have succeeded at both. And now he's kind of working to share what he's learned with people.
So the book is split into two sections. You've got wealth, you've got happiness. The part that impacted me the most was the happiness section. I actually read that twice over because it hit me so hard, and I just found myself stopping and taking pictures and sending these little snippets to my friends over WhatsApp, and I just kept going back to it. It's absolutely phenomenal. So I want to start with this happiness and these ideas of peace versus joy. So we've got peace and we've got joy. What is more valuable?
I think it's subjective and comes in different moments and different contexts. There's a more eloquent quote about this in the book, but it's also about like how much is bundled into the word happiness, and how many different things people think of when they hear the word happy. Like, does it mean to be just ebullient and overjoyed in a moment and blissfully happy at some accomplishment? Or is it this like state of contentedness? Or is it this state of flow and being almost distracted? Or is it just the absence of suffering or desire or something like that? So there's a lot of kind of different ways you can interpret it. But one of my favorite, which is what I think you're getting there, is like happiness is peace in motion, and peace is happiness at rest. And like seeking peace is a little easier, maybe a little more clear than sitting with this question of like, oh, what do I need to make me happy? Because then it's a very like the sloppy version of that thinking is just kind of like, how do I get what I want? Because then what I want will make me happy. And what he calls out in the book is this like very core thing that we all do all the time, which is like put our happiness into this sort of contract of desire, this expectation that like when something changes about our circumstances, then we will be happy. And that's really that's he calls it like the fundamental delusion, like the thing that we are doing to ourselves all the time, like depriving ourselves of happiness instead of learning to remove that desire or be happy with and grateful for what we have currently. And that's the trade-off that we're making.
So one of the quotes I wrote down on happiness from the book is, happiness to me is mainly not suffering, not desiring, not thinking too much about the future or past, really embracing the present moment and the reality of what is and the way it is. And exploring this theme of happiness, then I think a lot of people associate happiness with extrinsic things, or goals, or you can have a body goal. You can say to yourself, man, if I can get down to 15% body fat, I'd be so happy. That's all I want. And you get there, and all of a sudden it's a good feeling for like 2 seconds, and you're like, now what? Or
you move the goalposts on yourself. Yeah.
And you can get obsessed with a metric. So like maybe a social media metric or a YouTube subscriber metric. And you're just thinking, if I can get 100,000 subscribers, that's going to make me happy. But you get there, and these things, the happiness just doesn't seem to live up to what it was. So why is believing you're going to be happy because of external circumstances, why is that it just seems like a never-ending process?
I think the pattern that you see is creating a goal or a desire, depriving yourself of happiness until you reach it. And then when you reach it, like if you're the kind of person who's going to set a goal and then work to reach it, you're the kind of person who's going to set a new goal and then work to reach it. And so you have this moment of contentedness with reaching your goal, maybe, or you're already moving the goalpost as you make progress towards it. And you're like, 15% body fat's cool, but like, what would 10 feel like? And you decide that at 17%. And so all of a sudden you're like, there is no moment of accomplishment at 15 because you've already moved the post on yourself. And it gets you into this place where you're never feeling proud and accomplished, and at the same time tying your pride and accomplishment to this feeling of happiness. When you can, and the discipline here is like, well, there's a lot of ways to approach it. And it's kind of, Naval talks about this a little bit in the book. Like, this is not a black and white thing. Like, this is full of paradox and nuance and challenge, because like, you don't want to just like become a monk and meditate all day and become apathetic towards everything in your life and become so contented that you stop going about your life and like exercising and working and meeting people and like doing everything right. Like, that is not the goal here for most people. But recognizing that your desires are causing unhappiness is a meaningful insight on its own, and reminding yourself of that constantly. The other piece that you can kind of bring in here is this like making goals significantly smaller, right? Like, don't say like, I'll be happy when I reach 15% body fat. Understand the things that you have to do every day to get there, and then say like, if I am doing these things that I know will get me to this goal, like, I am at peace, I'm contented. If I'm moving my body, if I'm exercising, if I'm eating healthy, like, then there's no reason for me to be causing emotional turmoil in myself, right?
One of the reasons that I first bought this book is I just feel like on every Instagram book page, I was seeing quote after quote after quote from this book. Every sort of personal development bookstagrammer was sharing this book and saying it was a must read. And I was seeing all these quotes float around. And one of the ones I saw everywhere was, don't take yourself so seriously. You're just a monkey with a plan. What does that mean to you?
I think so I generally think Naval is much funnier than he gets credit for. Like, he drops a lot of philosophical bombs, but especially if you go like deeper in his Twitter, you find a bunch of stuff like that that's like pretty hilarious. And I tried to really like bring some of that through in the book. I think it's a funny, like, we often forget that we're just like fucking animals, right? Like, we're just monkeys who like got enough calories to develop a frontal lobe and develop consciousness. And so we're going through this, like, our lives pretending as though we're not like constantly in this shitstorm of emotions and like instincts and animal like tendencies that we can barely control. And we just kind of like stumbled into being into like carrying this burden of consciousness, which means we're like planning for the future and like have this voice in our heads that we can't turn off. And like, I think it's just shaking yourself of that a little bit and learning to not take it all so seriously is like just a good hack for kind of like coping. Like, I don't know, it's especially when you're just like all riled up and focused on shit and like trying to accomplish something aggressive. Like, it is another paradox, but it's like almost easier when you just like let go of the insane like focus and just enjoy what you're doing. Like, everything kind of comes much easier, and you tend to have a lot more longevity. Like, you get more like, you almost get more gas in the tank when you're finding it easy, and you're finding it easy when you're finding it fun. And like, it's more fun when you're not taking it so goddamn seriously.
Definitely is, man. So I take the same walk to the gym every day. It takes me about 20-25 minutes. I walk there, walk back, so you're looking 40 minutes, maybe an hour walk in a day on total. Okay, so I live in Wales in the UK, very scenic country, loads of hills, loads of trees, loads of plants, and my walk to work is quite a beautiful walk. So you're walking through this wooded area. So I'm walking through all these trees, this lovely scenery. But on my walk, I've noticed, and I only really noticed after I read this book, is that I'm not there. It's almost like I'm not there on the walk. My body's moving, but my mind's thinking, okay, we got this next week, there's this next month. Where am I going to be in 2 years time, and then all of a sudden I'm on a tangent and I'm going back to the past. So I'm in the future, I'm in the past, but I'm not appreciating this quite lovely walk that I'm on. I'm not appreciating what's happening right now. And I know a lot of people would travel to see, you know, scenery like we've got over here, and I just not appreciating it because my mind's just racing to the future, worrying about things that I have no control over right now. And this is what Naval talks about this in the book. He says a very small percentage of your brain is focused on the present, most of it's on the future and the past, and that you can literally destroy your happiness if you spend all your time living in delusions of the future. So what can we do? How can we be a bit more conscious of remaining present?
I think it's a muscle. It's an instant. It's a practice, I guess. And you're going to fail at it a lot, and it takes a long time, but you can build. And Naval talks about it. It's like he trained himself to become happier, and like train in the same sense that somebody like trains in the gym. You identify like a movement or a habit or something that you need to change in order to become happier, like what you're talking about, of like appreciating the present moment and creating either a trigger or a mantra or just the instinct to do it, and reminding yourself to do it as often as you can. I think there's a lot of practices that can help, like, you know, gratitude, or like, I think having a daily walk is like very, very helpful. And if that triggers it for you to like take a deep breath and like appreciate the trees and the scene, that's good. You're never going to reach 100% of this, but it's and it's helpful. I think it's helpful to know that it's hard work, right? Like, to say that happiness is a choice just seems sort of trite, and it makes it seem like anytime you're not choosing happiness, you're failing, and it's hard work, right? It like, you're never going to be perfectly in the moment. There's, you know, monks who meditate for decades and like still fail at this regularly, and I don't think that's the goal. But I think you know, some of the happiest people are the people who trained themselves to appreciate and to be grateful and to bring themselves into that present moment just more often than people who don't.
A few years ago, I had a marketing job in the capital of this country, so a really busy place, and there was a lot going on, and there was all these, you know, you had to turn up in a suit, everyone was high energy, it was business, okay? And I lasted a week before I quit because they had these morning meetings where they try and instill all this mentality in you. They pick a topic and they do almost like a little lecture for an hour before you start the day. It was quite weird. And in our first week, they were talking about money, and all these people were saying, yeah, money is as valuable as air. Like, we need money. And they were really money focused, everyone there, which is why I ended up leaving after a week, because I wasn't on that wavelength. And it made me think back to when my podcast partner and we went on a trip to Nepal to do the Everest base camp walk. And we passed all these kids who were literally living in the sides of mountains, the little dugout caves. They were just living in there in terrible conditions in the Himalayas, but they looked like the happiest kids I'd ever seen in my life. Like, I couldn't believe how happy they are. And then we were thinking back to kids we know from around here who just have all these luxuries, Xbox, food, everything they want, and they just seem a little bit miserable. And it's this idea in the book of success does not earn happiness. And it just makes me think of that toxic hustle culture that you see on Instagram, all these business gurus telling you to grind, and go for success. Do you think that sort of toxic hustle culture is a bit of a problem?
I don't know if it's a problem. I don't know. It is a problem if you are in that and you think that that's going to end in some state of happiness. I love high energy, high accomplishing people, and like spend plenty of time in that mindset and have friends who do the same. It's good to build things and help people and produce and invest and save, and all of that is good. I don't judge it, even if it's not like high production. I think it's only a problem if you expect that road to end somewhere that it's not going to. So if you think that like reaching 100,000 followers and being Gary Vee is going to make you happy, then like that's a problem, because you're just like swimming in the wrong direction and working hard at it. And I would hate for people to spend 10 years trying to reach a place that isn't the place that they wanted to get. But if that's the place that they want to get and they're working hard to get there, rock on.
Yeah. I feel like every time I have this type of discussion on this podcast, we end up accidentally calling out Gary Vee. So I
mean, he's built an amazing brand. If he's like the guy with the flag in the sand for hustle culture, like that's a good brand, right? Like,
yeah, for sure. I would love to speak to Gary Vee. I used to be a massive fan. I just feel like we always call him out, but that just shows what he's built for himself. Yeah,
I mean, he is maybe the best example of just like an Energizer bunny human being, like, which is a rare and amazing thing. And I feel like I would love to interview or like read a book or understand like those high energy people and being like, is this natural? Like, have you been like this since you were 3 and like you just can't not talk and be awake for like that's just who you are? You're just like a constant nuclear bomb of energy, or is that like a learned behavior that you have chosen in instinctively kind of instilled? There's this great podcast called How to Take Over the World, and this guy Ben Wilson like reads books about people who like Genghis Khan all the way up to like Steve Jobs, and just like people with high impacts on history. And he says like consistently one of the most consistent traits amongst all of these people is like people describing them as incredibly high energy, which totally checks out for like the biographies and stuff that I've read too. That's Benjamin Franklin and Richard Branson and Ted Turner, all like this inhuman kind of level of energy that I think is really interesting. It may just be like, that's how some people are. But also maybe that they understand how helpful that is for other people and like work hard to produce it and be that like catalyst for everybody else, which I like is awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting to be with high energy people. Obviously, I'm from the UK. It's very slow moving. Everyone's easy going, laid back. So for me, when I see someone like Gary Vee screaming down the camera at me, I think, I wonder what he's like when the camera goes off. Does he just zone out? But you're a bit closer to this sort of Silicon Valley than me. Obviously, you're up there in the US. You've been around these types of people. Do you really think there's people like that who operate at that energy all the time, even when the camera's off?
Yeah.
Wow. That's hard to contemplate.
Yeah. And, I don't, maybe they like sleep in a super oxygenated chamber and like drink 2 pots of coffee every day or whatever. I don't know. Like that's, but yeah, there's definitely people who are just seem like endless sources of energy for themselves and for others. And it's super cool to be around those kind of people, man. Like it elevates your expectations. It elevates like of yourself. It makes impossible things seem possible. Like, and there are just people who are like effectiveness multipliers and energy multipliers for all the people around them. And you can't spend too much time with those people, right? Like that's awesome.
There's a question in the book about the type, who do you think of as being successful? Naval says it's people who don't need anything from anybody. The prime example that came to my mind, so my favorite band of all time is Queen. There's 3 existing members of Queen. There's Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon. As soon as Freddie Mercury died and Queen, or that era of Queen ended, John Deacon, he just vanished from public eye. You never see him in an interview. He's not on social media. He keeps himself to himself. He wants nothing to do with the notoriety of the band going forward. There's no bad blood. He just did what he did and removed himself. But it makes me think, I look at someone like Brian May, an existing member of Queen, and the fame he has over here in this country is astronomical. And I think that, you know, a John Deacon could have had that, but he doesn't need that. And when I grew up, I always thought, it's quite sad that he chose to hide himself away. But now looking back, I'm thinking that makes him pretty successful in my eyes.
Yeah.
Who do you think of as being successful? Like, what kinds of people?
I think everybody gets to choose their own definition of success. And so, you know, when I think like the people, it's very hard to decide from the outside who is successful and who isn't, because the people who consider them, I consider people who consider themselves successful to be successful, which requires not only that they know what they want, but then that they arrange their life the way they wanted it. So like your Queen story is a good example. Like if John wants to be like independent and quiet and live out his retirement with his family and small community, and or produce whatever he's producing now for himself, and he knows that's what he wants and he's accomplished that, then like he is successful. And I forget the other guy's name.
Brian May.
If Brian May wants, you know, set his own course towards achieving incredible fame and notoriety, and he's accomplished that, then like they are both successful, because we all want different things and are gifted in different ways and choose different paths. So it doesn't have anything to do with fame or not fame, or notoriety or not notoriety, or accomplishment or not accomplishment, or material wealth or not. Like if your main goal in life or main desire is to be an incredible father and husband, and you become a great husband and father, then like you are successful regardless of whether anybody else would put you on some list or not, right? But it's impossible to know that, you know, from the outside. It's probably a few hours of conversation with somebody before you even start to begin to see the truth of that in them.
For sure. Oh, man, I love that. I love that. There's a section in the book, happiness habits, meditation, workouts, but Naval gives his, but I want to turn it to you. What are some of Eric's happiness habits?
I find that if I get like time to myself, that is almost always like a path to happiness. I definitely like try to keep a workout discipline, and that helps a lot. Not drinking a lot helps a lot. Like I have found it much easier to remove negative things and keep like a lower wavelength kind of vibe is like way better to stay. It's like staying healthy, staying happy, staying kind of like on the rails is better than like chasing one kind of like, you know, living your whole life for like Friday night or Saturday night and like trying to live an amazing story for 4 hours and then like spending 36 hours recovering from that. Like that's just a tough cycle. Giving yourself, I mean, the little happiness triggers that we talked about of like bringing yourself into the moment and appreciating that. And one that I'm not sure Naval mentions, but just trying to like, even trying and giving yourself permission to try to like produce art of some sort. You don't ever have to publish or share or whatever, but like there's some real joy that comes in just like fucking around with something. And that's like, just giving yourself the space to do that is kind of wonderful. Yeah, like the little stuff that he talks about, there's a few triggers, like thinking about it when you brush your teeth and just like coming into that moment. Like that's a good trigger because you are, you do it, twice a day. And as soon as you pick it up, you're like, oh yeah, I need to like not scroll my phone while I brush my teeth. I need to just like close my eyes and like appreciate things. There's this quote, like, if you can't be happy, if you can't find happiness in a cup of coffee, like you're not going to be happy with a yacht.
Yeah.
Which I now think about every time I pick up a cup of coffee. Or, when you feel the, like in our case, I don't know how well this will work in Wales, but when you feel the sun on your skin, like take a minute to like look up and smile and appreciate this thing that people have been appreciating for generations. So just like stacking up some of those little triggers helps you get more of those like moments of appreciation in the day, for sure.
Yeah, well, the sun is very hard to come by in Wales, so when it does come, I do appreciate it.
maybe when you feel rain on your skin, is like,
there we go. That's a bit more relatable.
When you see the fog, look up and wonder.
I love that. So for me, I'm just turned 25, so my later teenage years, I grew up with social media, and with a lot of that came, I think that breeds a lot of jealousy. So you see these people's lives that are, they portray in the best part of their lives, and you see people think, man, I went to school with that person, they've already got a house, like I wish I had a house, or they do this. So even famous people, you see all their glamorous lives, and you look at your own, you sat there on your bed scrolling on your phone, you're thinking, damn, I want that. But or people may be watching this podcast now and they're thinking, man, Eric's a good looking guy, he's got a great set of hair, I don't have hair like that, and they're jealous. So how would you say to deal with jealousy? Because Naval talks about this meditation he uses, this sort of 15 minutes of just accepting things for what they are.
Yeah, Naval has maybe the best prescription for envy that I've ever heard. And if there was like one idea, I still remember where I was when I first heard that idea. And it's on his podcast with Shane Parrish, The Knowledge Project. And it was this idea that like, I think we are all like, envy is maybe the most universal feeling that we all kind of go through. Especially with like social media and stuff like that, which we'll come back to. But Naval's prescription is basically, if you are not willing to make a 100% full switch with that person and take on everything, all of their problems, all of their challenges, all of their struggles and suffering and sacrifice, then like you don't get to pick, you don't want to pick one trait from 100 different people and be jealous of the best thing that each of 100 different people has, because it's fucking crazy, right? When you think about it that way, it's like objectively insane. It's like, what are you gonna like? You just want to like, oh, I want max stats in every category forever, and like that's your expectation of yourself. Like you got a limited number of stat points to spread across all of your categories. Everybody does, and people who have achieved outsized things or have outsized things, usually like you never know what that comes with, right? You never know if that like beautiful person's like, do you want to spend 4 hours in the gym? Do you want the eating disorder? Do you want to spend all of your money on like beauty products? Do you want the complex that comes with like being really attractive? Like you just never know all of the rest of all of the, either the work or the sacrifice or the pain or the dark side of some of those things maybe. And his prescription is like, when you realize that to have that one thing, you have to take on everything else that person is. Usually that envy like goes away because you're perfectly happy being you and playing the hand that you're dealt for the most part. And and that's where, you know, kind of being the best version of yourself comes, and appreciating the strengths and opportunities and attributes that you uniquely have. I think, I mean, your call out of social media is correct. Go back to that decision, the sort of desire, the bond between desire and unhappiness that we talked about before. Because there is no, if you were setting out to create an engine for creating desires, like how would you mind fuck someone? Like, think about this in the 70s. Like, if you wanted to mind fuck somebody like as hard as you could and be sure that they were unhappy, like what would you do? You would go find all of their deepest desires, and then you would show them as rapidly and frequently as possible what some other people who have achieved those, your heart's deepest desires and like your biggest insecurities, you'd show people who've accomplished it, which is basically what Instagram is, as far as I can tell. Like, it measures everything that you do, and it itself benefits when it shows you, when it like increases the gap basically in your mind between like what you have and what you want. And that's like how they make money, whether it's products or people or experiences or whatever. And that's just like, you're opting into getting mind fucked like in that context. And you're choosing, it's the most efficient engine for creating desires that you can imagine. So when you're opening that app, like, realize that that's what you're doing to yourself. And, you know, every minute may cause hours of unhappiness down the line that you're going to have to sit with and battle back. And I probably download Instagram once a month and spend like 30 minutes getting sucked down a rabbit hole. And I'm like, God, fuck this. What am I doing? Like, delete this app again. I want to go back to my life. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not like, I know some people think the same with Twitter. Like, for me, Twitter's had more upside than downside, and it gives me a little more control over what I see and how I see it. I find Instagram, at least for me, to not be worth it, or TikTok or whatever, but everybody gets to like make their own decisions. But yeah, like, definitely, like, it is much easier to control your environment than to control your behavior.
For sure. I mean, when I first reached out to you, I normally reach out to people through Instagram, or I'll go and, you know, click the contact button on Instagram, link to their email. But I think your Instagram's private. I don't think you use it a lot, but yeah, I connected with you on Twitter. Do you have any sort of rules in regard to social media? Maybe how often you let yourself use it? Just to have a social media habit. Are there any sort of rules you give yourself?
Yeah, I mean, on Twitter, I'm starting to use lists much more, and which lets you really, like, you know, it's more like reading a newspaper. Like, I want to flip to the business section, or I want to flip to, like, you know, the, like, whatever I want to learn, I can go kind of down that rabbit hole and be a little more selective. It's not perfect because it's fucking Twitter, but you know, you can follow and unfollow people pretty easily. You can mute and unmute people pretty easily. I have the filter on to show latest tweets instead of algorithmically like chosen tweets. I've let it get slightly out of hand, but try to like follow less and less people. So it's a very high signal. I stay away from the Discover feed or any like feed that Twitter curates for me, because I just like don't trust it and want to choose my own inputs as much as possible. Yeah, that's as close as I come to like social media habits. I do try to limit it, and I try to default to, I separate consumption from creation. Like, I publish stuff through like a program that lets me tweet from it without getting distracted by consumption. So when I'm producing, and when I'm consuming, and try to like separate those actions. But yeah, I mean, I treat Twitter like my living room, right? Like, I try to stick with people who I would want in my house and like who I want to talk to, and a lot of them I'm friends with in real life or want to become friends with in real life, right? So it's, you know, I'm not following beautiful people in beautiful places doing beautiful things. I'm following just like people I like and want to get to know.
That brings me on to this 5 chimps theory, that you could predict the predict what a chimp is going to be like based on the behavior of the 5 chimps surrounds itself with, and how that's applicable to humans. So how do you choose your chimps?
It's a very good question. I think like authenticity is the first word that comes to mind. Kind of pivoting off what we were talking about, like there's a lot of, especially on social media, there's like a lot of chimps who are just trying to like sell you some shit. And that's very different than people who are like, no, I genuinely want to, like, we share interests and I want to talk about those interests and learn from each other. Definitely like generous, at least in the community sense of like, we are willing to help each other and teach each other. I tend to hang with people who are, I don't know if it, like, ambitious isn't the right word, but like high agency is probably the right word. Like people who believe in their ability to change their circumstance and some of the world around them, and people who understand that they can choose their attitude and choose happiness, and like even if they're going through a hard time or doing something difficult, to be upbeat and appreciative and gracious and not like creating thunderclouds over their head until some future hypothetical moment, kind of like back when we talked about it, because life's just like slightly too short for like delay gratification indefinitely. And you don't have to be unhappy to accomplish what you want to accomplish in most cases, right? But I think people, I don't know where that comes from, but a lot of us have that. I don't know if it was like, I don't know if it's a learned behavior from like parents or work or whatever, that like when you're in an office, the more stressed you look, the more productive you seem to people, like, and it's like a optics game. I don't know if it's just like an emotional instinct to like create space for yourself. But it's kind of pernicious, I think. And so like there are people who seem to have learned their way out of that, or came up in environments that didn't encourage that, and like those are wonderful people to spend time with too.
We talked right at the top of the show about freedom, the name behind this podcast. And so I'll ask you, what is the difference between freedom to and freedom from? And what does freedom mean to you, Eric?
Yeah, Naval's, if you have the quote, you should probably read it, because I'm sure it's more perfect than my rendition of it. But Naval separates, he talks about when he was young, his aspiration to freedom was freedom to do something, right? Freedom to like travel whenever he wanted to, or buy something, or start a company, whatever, it was all aspirational, kind of like we're talking about, right? And as he's either grown older or changed his perspective, or some combination of the two, he now aspires to freedom from. So freedom from envy or jealousy, freedom from obligations, like work, freedom from the expectations of others, things like that. So it's not, and it's a shift from kind of maybe like ambition or thirst to prove yourself or build social status, or in a shift towards like independence and self-sufficiency, and understanding that like you can create your own happiness and peace and perspective. You can't, and it's actually like harder to do that the more deeply you're involved with it, like a lot of other people and all of their things. And so I think learning to separate a little bit of that's actually like a conflict that I'm not sure is totally resolved, and that I'm like curious about his perspective on, because I think there's a lot of happiness that comes from like creating and giving and being interdependent with your family and your community, and that's rewarding in a lot of ways. And that's like Adlerian psychology, and that's like the Harvard sort of long arc story of happiness, like the happiness study that they've done. And a lot of happiness is based on relationships, but a lot of happiness in a philosophical sense is based on like like the metaphorical version of like sitting in a cave and meditating and working on yourself, and then like owning your own mind. And there's a little bit of a conflict there, and I think both are true, but the seam between the two is seems to be largely ignored by both of those camps. But I think it's really interesting, and it's where most of us live and spend both of our time. And maybe it's just one of those paradoxes that we have to live with. But I think, both understanding the levers and trade-offs between both of those is helpful for any like practically minded person who's still going about their lives.
When I got to the end of the book, I was instantly, I just had this inspiration to just do all the things I'd always wanted to do. All these little adventures I'd written down on my bucket list, I suddenly wanted to just take action on and stop putting them off and get around to it. I remember I can't remember the quote I've got the quote written down, and I sent it to my girlfriend, and I said, look, we've got this list of all this stuff we've always wanted to do. I can't remember the last time we did one of them. Let's try and make some happen. Like, that's what the book did for me. And there was a quote that says, what if this life is the paradise we were promised and we're just squandering it? How do you reflect on that?
I think it's a good kick in the ass, right? Like, sure. I like that it's it encourages you in the sense that like you've got one life. There's no reason to not interpret it as it is kind of baked in gratitude and urgency, right? It's like there is so much to appreciate, and it is harder work to appreciate it than to take it for granted and like choose negativity and complain about whatever. That's the path of least resistance, but the path of the greatest joy is appreciating this life for the paradise that it is, and appreciating the miracle of your own consciousness and awareness and sensation. And I think it is just so easy to not do things. But that's so have you done any of those things on your list yet?
I only sent her this thing at the start of this week. So okay. I've started making plans to put a few things in motion. I'm taking action. I think there's a bit right at the back as well. So see if I can find it.
I think pretty close after that comes the idea that inspiration is perishable. And you should act on it immediately.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was looking for. And that is the kick up the ass. That's just like, act on it. And I think it's a beautiful way to end the book, and beautiful way to start winding down this conversation before we move to the two questions that I ask every guest that comes on the show. The first one, so we've talked today about your book. It's going to impact so many people's lives, certainly impacted mine. But what I want to know is, what books have you read in your life that have had a big impact on you?
That's another good question. I think there's a lot of buckets there. I think the books that are probably the foundation of my like set of values in psychology. Like, I read every single strip of Calvin and Hobbes when I was a kid. And that's like probably more of my personality than is obvious. I read all of Roald Dahl. I love Ender's Game, and like that early sci-fi stuff was super impactful for me. Around 20, I read Poor Charlie's Almanack. That was like my roadmap for understanding so much of the world. And I read a lot, kind of like daisy chained off of that, getting into like Benjamin Franklin and Robert Cialdini and books about investing. And I love Charlie Munger's worldview and rigor and morality and thought patterns. And I love the community around Charlie Munger too. So I think that has introduced me to many, many wonderful people who are still good friends. And that's another good way to pick chimps, is like pick your heroes and find people with the same heroes. And like, you'll generally do pretty well. Those are probably the first. And then there's like books that just showed me worlds that I didn't, or helped me understand the world in like a new way. You know, you feel like you're reading like an X-ray, and you're like, oh shit, that's how that works. So that list is kind of like, I read Confessions of an Economic Hitman when I was in college, and that, and what's it called? Any like geopolitical book. So like Peter Zehan's like The Accidental Superpower, or what's the other, like Power of Geography or something like that, are like, shows you a lot of how and why countries are the way they are, and how geography is upstream of the culture that emerges in a place. There's The Systems Bible is an amazing book. So much of our world is like governed by systems, and it's like mock dry, hilarious reading that's like not everybody's cup of tea, but I feel like I understand the world much, much better after reading The Systems Bible. And the one I'm reading now that feels like that is Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And it's so refreshing. Like, my favorite feeling in the world is reading one of those books where you feel like this person understands something about the world for the first time and is like showing it to you, and you feel like you just got a whole new lens. And you're like, oh God, this is like so refreshing, to feel like you're reading an operational manual for the universe, especially in like soft skill stuff like mythology and storytelling, or systems operations and stuff like that. It's amazing.
Some really, really good recommendations in there. I think I heard you mention one of our former guests in there, Robert Cialdini. Is that Influence you were referring to?
Yeah.
Great book.
Yeah. Influence is definitely like, Munger really enjoyed that book and talks about it. And it's like some of the foundation of his, the mental models for the psychology of human misjudgment, which is a great speech that you can find on YouTube or SoundCloud or whatever. And that started with Munger reading Cialdini. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I don't know if that's a different culture thing, or if I'm just been wrong, or if we're all right. I've never heard it. You're probably more right since you host a podcast with him.
Well,
Cialdini.
maybe, but maybe it might just be my Welsh accent creeping through. Who knows? The last question I have for you, this might be a tough one for someone who gets quite philosophical at times, but this could be anything. The answer could be your family, it could be your friends, it could be your work, it could be your art. But for you, Eric, right now, what makes a life worth living?
It is going to be weird to answer this question as a guy without kids, but I think it's raising a family and having great kids, and being like a good father, passing your genes forward and teaching them all that you can. I think that's like, so many people I've talked to have said that that's the most meaningful thing that they've ever done in their life, to a degree where, like, even though I haven't done it, I'm pretty sure that's the most meaningful thing you can do with your life. And that is coming from somebody who also deeply appreciates and finds value in creating art and helping others and teaching and sharing and enjoying so much of the rest of life. But I still think that is just so aggressively dwarfs everything else that we will do in our lives, like from our own perspective, that I kind of already think that, even though it's not yet a lived experience for me.
It's a very unique answer. I love it. I haven't heard that one yet.
Oh, all right. Well,
200 episodes.
Then maybe I'm wrong. No, I don't know.
No, I love it. No, I love it.
It's not, the most probably not a popular is like self-development podcast answer, but I think it's right.
I love it, man. The most common
what
answer.
Did you say the most common answer is? Yeah.
Usually family, I think, which is kind of the same, family that just hasn't happened yet, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see.
I love it.
I also want to say, like, to make it super clear for people, there is a physical book, but this book is also available for free on the website. So on navalmanack.com, you can get the digital versions for free. You can listen to the audiobook for free on my podcast. And, you know, we kind of created this as a public service. So I don't want people to feel like Amazon's the only place to get this. You know, if you're strapped for cash or just want the digital version, or, you know, want to leave your money in the market, like, you can read it all for free and
That's awesome.
get access to all of it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, we've talked about it today, the Almanack of Naval Ravikant. I will leave links in the description to not only the Amazon version, but I will leave those links to the free accessible versions as well. Eric, thanks so much for coming on, man. I appreciate this so much. Just before you go, let these guys know where they can find you on Twitter.
Yeah, I am unfortunately still on Twitter a lot. At Eric Jorgenson, and I write and publish other stuff at ejorgenson.com. So I got open DMs. I'm easy to get a hold of. But Lewis, I super appreciate this. Like, it was a great conversation. Thanks for having me and bringing the heat. This is fun.